Thanks for joining us on this special edition of the Reminger Report podcast on emerging technologies. Today, we are fortunate to be joined by special guest and CEO of Battleface, Sasha Gainullin. Hopefully I pronounced that last name correctly.
Yeah, all good.
So, Sasha, thank you for coming in. We're super excited to have you joining us here today. If you could, I know a little bit about Battleface just because you and I have talked. Mm-hmm. I know they're in the travel insurance industry. But before we kind of jump into Battleface and what they do, tell us a little bit about your personal background.
Sure.
And how did you kind of get involved in this space?
Sure. So I'm originally from Russia, but I had a chance to go on the exchange student program when I was in high school for a year to a small town called Stevens Point, Wisconsin. And Stevens Point, Wisconsin just happened to be a place where one of now the largest travel insurance companies called Travel Guard, that's owned by AIG, was born. And the founder of Travel Guard was inspired by international cultures and diversity, and he was really keen on building out a company in the middle of kind of central Wisconsin as a global leader of travel insurance. And that's how I got into travel insurance through a scholarship program that allowed me to go to University of Wisconsin in exchange to working at Travel Guard. And I just started from working in the call center, and the company was going through rapid growth. And that I would say John and Travel Guard is kind of the founder of the concept of travel insurance here in the United States. So I had a chance just to work side by side with him, building out a company. And my specialty within travel insurance is emergency medical assistance. So whenever you're traveling away from home, and it could be internationally, could be domestically, one of the most important parts of travel insurance, I believe, is emergency medical assistance, coverage for medical expenses, medical evacuation. And I would be the person that would be responding to any type of event, injury, illness, accidents, death, helping people to either get to a resolution faster or get them back home. And that particular skill carried over for the next 20 plus years, building out international operations through Latin America, Asia, Europe. We eventually sold Travel Guard to AIG, and I was essentially doing the exact same thing for them.
Now, I think that's interesting because one of the things that you mentioned was with regards to, I think of healthcare and health insurance. And I think one of the common misconceptions among a lot of people is, well, I have health insurance. Mm-hmm. And so if I have health insurance here in the United States, when I travel abroad, my health insurance automatically will cover whatever I need in that country as well, which is not always the case.
Yeah, they can barely cover you here with all the deductibles and PPOs, and that's not the case here. It was actually interesting. That whole concept had shifted quite a bit. I remember 20 plus years ago when I was first starting out in the industry, a lot of travelers were shocked that their Blue Cross Blue Shield of the world or Cigna or the domestic health insurance policies either flat out didn't have coverage while you're outside of the home country, or just had significant deductibles and out-of-network coverages and so on. But most importantly, internationally, these companies are not able to really help you. So it's a big, pay and claim type of scenario. And then I remember in the early 2000s, or actually late 1990s, Travel Guard got a contract for American Express to handle all of American Express's emergency travel assistance program behind every single layer of the card, all the way up to the Platinum Centurion later. And we've built out a Global Assist Center for them. And that experience was very interesting, just to understand what people know and don't know about travel insurance or their credit cards. And by the way, Travel Guard still handles that account for American Express. And when I would be working with an American Express cardholder below Platinum card, every single person that I would be talking to either thinks that American Express has the coverage for them for the travel insurance component of it, or they have health insurance policy that would pay for things. But American Express did not have coverage for medical evacuation or medical expenses. They would provide assistance, what it's called 24/7 assistance. We would help you, but you would have to be actually responsible for the actual expenses. So I remember a very interesting case that changed my perspective on the knowledge here in the United States on travel insurance. I was working with a couple who just got married, and they were from Seattle, Washington, and they went skiing in Switzerland, I believe. And the guy had an accident, and he was paralyzed neck down. So from a honeymoon scenario to them contacting American Express, thinking that they have this coverage because they bought their airline tickets with their gold card. Unfortunately, they didn't. So I was working with the family and their home health insurance, trying to see what we can do to convince them to pay for medical expenses, medical evacuation. And I don't remember who the company was, but they just couldn't understand what type of necessity is there to evacuate him back home into a home hospital because he was already in Switzerland receiving medical care. Mm-hmm. So that family ended up paying nearly $60,000 just for medical care, then transportation, then helicopter, of course, services from the mountain. And of course, on top of it, they had to deal with all of these scenarios because who deals with this regularly? Nobody. So it's a big misconception.
Absolutely. I'm learning to ski now for the first time at the ripe old age of 39. And my wife is trying to convince me that I'm going to get injured while skiing. Mm-hmm. And now that you have told this story, I am going to make sure she's not listening to this episode of the podcast, because if she does, she'll say, I told you so. Did you hear what Sasha just said?
Yeah, don't invite me over for dinner because I'll tell you more stories.
There's so much to unpack and so much I kind of want to follow up on and ask questions about. And the first is, I think it's interesting, one of the things that you said when you started working with Travel Card, you actually started out like at the call center. Mm-hmm. How long, I mean, I assume, please correct me if I'm wrong, that's like an entry-level position then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you've literally worked from like the bottom all the way up now to running a travel insurance company.
Yeah. I think, it's just... Of course, luck has a lot to do with it, right? So it's like me running into John Noel and John Noel being inspired with, bringing diversity into Stevens Point, Wisconsin. For example, he adopted 4 kids from all different backgrounds and had 6 kids in total. And for example, our head of operations and chief operations officer at Battleface, we all started on the same day at AIG. So we all worked side by side, building out Travel Guard and then AIG, and so it was the most amazing experience because yes, I started in the call center. Within I think 3 months of me being there, Travel Guard gets a contract with American Express. So in John's fashion, just like putting everyone behind the actual contract and the project, and then we're just learning as we go. And then I found myself really being passionate about helping people and figuring things out because it's all about common sense once you work with people internationally, because there's no handbook on how to evacuate someone after a skiing accident or work with somebody who died in a Middle Eastern country, and how do you actually transfer a body from there back home. So I found that work extremely fascinating. And but then, for example, some of the co-founding teams of Battleface, they moved on to building out tech applications or back office support or underwriting or every aspect of travel insurance from every angle that you could think of. So from the luck perspective, I guess I had an open canvas to essentially starting these operations. And Travel Guard bought a company when I graduated at the University of Wisconsin. First of all, it was really awesome because I was going to school during the day. It was a 24/7 call center, so I can work at night in the call center. That nobody wanted to work at night, but for me it was actually working out really well. On weekends I would be waiting tables to get cash. so it was really, really flexible. And then after I graduated from university, Travel Guard sponsored me for my H-1B and working visa and everything. And that took me all over the world building out these operations.
That's awesome. Now, tell us a little bit about Battleface. I mean, we've already kind of talked about it a little bit, about the team starting with AIG and now you guys are with Battleface. Tell us a little bit about the company. How did how did Battleface land here in Columbus? And what are they doing and kind of how they're approaching it? Just, give us the lowdown, I guess.
So from the start of our entry into the travel insurance market with TravelGuard and AIG, TravelGuard was built on the concept of one size fits all. Doesn't matter who you are, where are you going, you're going to a travel agency to book your flight, here's travel insurance, say yes and no. I always joke around that right now there's a buzzword within the insurtech space, embedded. Travel insurance has been embedded for decades. Like when you're going on the airline website and there's always travel insurance, right? Check. I remember us in the early 2000s, we were handling Walt Disney accounts. So when you book a Walt Disney vacation, travel insurance is part of it, and that was TravelGuard. So it's white labeled, super embedded, and specifically designed for Walt Disney. And that worked back then, because back then we traveled differently. We went to pretty much the same destinations. We had the same behavior in terms of purchasing our travel, and most likely the average American only traveled once a year, and for 2 weeks. And so that's why it made sense back in the day. Nowadays, the travel industry has shifted so much with Airbnb of the world or .com or different online travel agencies. Millennials and other travelers, they move around from one place to another. They go on a super cheap airfare, and then they change their airfare last minute, and they change their destinations, and you also, on top of it, you're no longer you see the standard like Paris, France as a top destination, but you see somewhere in the middle of nowhere, France as a top destination, because people want to learn how to cook or have an experience. And so how do you start evolving that with travel insurance? But of course, that was not the foresight. What happened to us is so my specialty is claims, emergency medical assistance, travel assistance. I started to see a shift in travel insurance all of a sudden, where it became the most helpful aspect of your travel to the most destructive aspect of your travel. And it started out with my experience with war and terrorism. So, for example, a family of 4 vacationing in Tunisia on the beach, and then there's a terrorist attack. War and terrorism is the number one exclusion on travel insurance policy. So if you're a victim of that attack, there's a chance of your claim being denied. Or you are, let's say you're going on vacation to Spain and you're sitting with your friends and you're like, oh, I've never tried scuba diving, but I really want to do it. And then you go scuba diving. That's number 2 exclusion on the generic travel insurance policy. And I never really paid attention to it up until we started dealing with these cases, and I couldn't understand why is it that why couldn't we offer as an industry relevant products to today's travelers and be upfront about what's covered, what's not covered. And that really led us to a conversation with Lloyd's of London. Over on the European side, is why is that the case? And the answer is really, really simple. There is no infrastructure in place that can ask these questions real time when consumers are purchasing the policy, and then custom building the policy based on those questions. So we spent a lot of time developing our tech infrastructure and algorithms to really unbundle travel insurance and pull it all apart, and then start building it for you while you're purchasing your policy. And then that's how we get to the end outcome of actually delivering the right policy for your trip based on your age, based on your destination, based on your actual needs, and based on your activities. And that also allowed us to do very, very similar, take the very similar approach to our partners as well, because when you go to a distribution channel number 1 to a distribution channel number 2, number 3, they're all selling the exact same product, but each one of them is uniquely different from one another. So naturally, they should have a custom-built products specifically for their customers. And then, of course, we were answering the question, why is it that when you book your flight from Columbus to New York or Columbus to Nairobi, Kenya, it's the exact same travel insurance policy where two trips are completely different? And how can we change that?
That is a fair question. So let me ask this: is scuba? Can I get insurance that would cover scuba diving through Battleface?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
I think it's interesting. It never would occur to me that scuba diving would not be covered under travel insurance. I mean, I'm not a big scuba diver myself, which is probably why. The war and terrorism, I think I've at least heard before. Like it's something that I'm at least aware of, but I was not previously aware of the scuba diving.
Yeah.
Does Battleface take into account, or is war and terrorism something that is covered under some policies?
Yeah, and so the war on terrorism coverage was created, rightfully so. It was created decades ago, right? When war on terrorism was like on the news with the Irish conflict or whatever, like something like really, really out there, true war. The terrorist concept didn't really came into our day-to-day lives up until September 11th, right? All of a sudden, destinations like New York, London, and after became not dangerous, but also that's where terrorism starts to happen. That exclusion continues to be applicable right from the old days. So what happens in the travel, I think it's also what happens in the insurance industry altogether, is just the policies just get copy-pasted over and over and over and over again, and nobody actually pauses and takes a look at what's covered, what's not covered, what's relevant today to today's travelers. And certainly, in certain risks are not just cannot be underwritten. So, for example, if you're planning to go to North Korea, it's a sanctioned country. So there's nothing that we can do. There's nothing that the insurance companies can do. It's just flat out sanctioned. So there is an element of what we do. It just has to be all based on the underwriting risk and what you're planning to do. For example, we would never provide coverage if you're participating in the war, for example, or those kind of elements. So what we're keen on developing is, and war and terrorism is actually no longer a problem because many companies already were looking into that.
Okay.
I think what was really interesting is that we get into natural disasters, we're getting into pandemics, we're getting into just reading through it. So pandemic all of a sudden became a day like everyday problem, where before it was SARS, Ebola, something regional, something that happens maybe for a month, but then all of a sudden COVID changed the landscape of the pandemic coverage as well. So in how do we have a platform in place or a company in place that can continue to reinvent the products and make them relevant?
The pandemic coverage, like you just mentioned, is one of those things that also I don't know that it would have occurred to me before the current pandemic with coronavirus, because I know just from dealing with the insurance industry the way we have that there's issues, that there's certain coverages that they deal with and the expectations that from the underwriting perspective that insurance carriers have. And you're right when you talk about a lot of the pandemics that we've seen in the last 15 or 20 years, I shouldn't say pandemics, but health crises or issues, they've been relatively contained both from a geographical standpoint, but also from a time standpoint. And they don't last for 2 years and cover the entire world.
Yeah.
And then you've got different places that have different restrictions and travel restrictions as well, which I'm sure complicates your job as well.
Yes. Yeah, of course. And by the way, pandemic is like number 3 exclusion. But and of course I'm oversimplifying.
I understand.
But so yeah, and this is what we've gotten from Lloyd's of London. When we came to Lloyd's of London, we sat down with different underwriters there, and they're like, we would love to underwrite all of these risks. We just need a platform that can properly rate based on all of this. And actually, to their credit, I remember this underwriter sitting there, and he was saying, I'm sick and tired of 20-pound policies, destination United States and destination Vietnam with $10 million in medical expense exposure. And I couldn't catch that. Why was that a problem until Until I started to think, I'm like, well, of course, the cost of medical care in the United States is vastly different versus other countries. And absolutely, he's right. It makes absolutely zero sense. Why is it the price is exactly the same? And this is where the one-size-fits-all type of products come in. I remember another case actually here in the United States, when we first launched here in the US. I remember seeing a policy that came through, and it was total trip cost was insured for $20,000, because in the United States it's very important from trip cancellation perspective, because travel is very expensive and people are concerned about getting their money back in case, obviously, they cannot travel. But then the departure date was tomorrow. I'm like, well, that's weird. I'm like, it's either fraudulent or like, why would you insure $20,000 and you're leaving tomorrow? Usually it's like 1 year in advance.
Sure.
So I called the guy, and he was on a business trip, going business class, fully refundable ticket, staying at like Ritz-Carlton somewhere in Tokyo, Japan, obviously refundable hotel, and he was there for 2 weeks. And I said, why'd you insure $20,000? And he's like, well, that's the first question you ask me. What's your total trip cost? and that's the most expensive part of a travel insurance policy. Many traditional insurance companies base their premium based on the percentage of your total trip cost, between 7 to 10%, and so do we. So, and that's what led us to even further unbundling travel insurance. And I asked him, why did you buy the policy? He's like, I was concerned about medical expense coverage because I know that my health insurance in the United States does not cover me outside of the United States, and they did not provide medical evacuation back home. So now when you come to Battleface, we literally just, you can pick and choose what you need and what you don't, because many travelers end up overpaying for their policy. And for example, baggage insurance is another example. If you're jumping on the trip between Columbus and New York and you're a business traveler and you don't have any baggage to check in, take a look at the policy. It says right there that you're paying for baggage insurance.
Yeah.
So,
those are two things I never would have thought of. I mean, that I never would have thought of when they asked total trip cost. Why you would need this if it was refundable.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
that's exactly true. And his entire trip was refundable. We actually refunded his premium because we just lowered his trip cost. But I doubt, like traditional insurance company, well, that's the beauty of a startup, right? You just hyper-focused on every single customer.
Right.
So you can then overanalyze and make decisions that way.
Well, I mean, but it's also helpful, right? Like when you're a startup, that you can see this and then make the decision that you can start unbundling based upon some of the preconceived assumptions that you would have been working on before. So
That's
if you
right.
wouldn't have called him and figured it out, you may not. It may have taken you longer to realize the trip cost. The way the trip cost factors in should probably be factored in a different way.
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so that resonates quite a bit, and the landscape keeps changing. Like right now, travelers are really concerned about quarantine cover, or what happens if I'm in Argentina and I catch COVID-19 and I cannot fly.
Right.
2 years ago, nobody would ever ask that question.
Absolutely. I was actually we were booking a hotel. My wife and I were last night, and she was booking through this. As we were talking about this, it started to come back to me. She was booking through she was looking at booking through a third-party travel travel site that's one of the popular ones on the internet. And she found a room that she thought was a good rate. It was a non-refundable price, but they were willing to sell you travel insurance. And it said, do you want travel insurance? And she said, this is non-refundable. I think we should buy the travel insurance. And I said, well, wait a second. Let me look to see what the actual hotel's website has as a fully refundable ticket or as a fully refundable night.
Yeah, sure.
And I looked, and the price was relatively the same.
Yeah,
and then
right.
I said to her, I'm like, well, is there some reason we shouldn't just book the refundable site, the refundable fare? I mean, it's through the hotel site and not worry about the travel insurance. And it occurred to me two things. One, it's the embedded aspect that you were talking about before, because it wasn't like this website was giving me options to search for which travel insurance carrier I wanted or what coverage I wanted. And frankly, I didn't know what coverage they were giving me, and I probably wouldn't have even looked into it. I would have clicked the button and proceeded. so it's like the example of that embedded aspect that you were talking about. But it's also a little bit of the aspect when you talk about, do we really even, like as in that situation for one refundable hotel night, do I really even need the travel insurance if I can cancel? Which I think is a question that I didn't start asking until last night when she was telling me, do you want to book this travel?
Yeah.
And I said, well, is it refundable?
Yeah.
And so it starts that kind of dialogue. Now, you've been working, and I know we've talked a little bit about this and touched on this, some of the trends that you're seeing. Are there any other trends that kind of stick out to you or that you kind of recognize in the travel insurance space?
Well, I think, there's, I think what really is happening in the travel insurance industry, which I think, when I say we, the travel insurance industry have created, and we're at fault, is the extreme high commissions that are being paid out to the distribution partners. And I didn't realize this until after we started Battleface, because obviously I was never in the commercial side of travel insurance. I was always on the operational side of travel insurance. But I had no idea that travel insurance companies were paying out 60% plus to distribution partners like airlines or big travel agencies in commissions just to get the business. And then eventually you see big players, insurance company number one and insurance company number two competing against each other, paying out more. And then you end up seeing deals that go between 70 to 80% in commission payout upfront. Then you're starting to think about the actual math behind the concept, because loss ratios are usually at about 30% with travel insurance. So mathematically, obviously, it doesn't make sense. And then you start questioning who gets hurt, and this is where the customer comes in with the policies that are so restrictive. This is where the cause of the exclusions, right, that come in, because the insurance carriers, the only thing that they can offer to their partners is a really limiting product that gets embedded into a purchase path that's filled with more exclusions than inclusions. And that did not come into light. And of course, I was, everyone in the industry who is passionate like me, we know this, and we were talking about this. Even Congress here was talking about this, that obviously all of this has to be cut out, and there's a huge reform on filings and everything else. But then eventually, big insurance companies figured out how to pay upfront marketing fees and all that stuff. So that really didn't fix the problem, because the problem was the actual insurance product at its core. It was just basically destroyed with all of these commissions. And then some countries, like Australia, for example, government came out and said, no more, maximum 20%, for example. So it just depends country by country. But here in the United States specifically, I think that was a big, now, first of all, COVID-19 exposed that. So I still remember it, January 17th, 2020, headline news, New York Times article, homepage, is travel insurance worth it? And the answer is no, it's worthless, because the journalist, her name's Elaine, really just dug into every single insurance company in the United States and pulled them apart, and how at the end of the day it brought zero value to their customers, and that's really true, because unfortunately, not like my mom still thinks I'm a travel agent. Who knows anything about travel insurance? so and who in the world this is actually specific to the United States. Even before COVID-19, only 20% bought travel insurance, and simply because the remaining 80% just didn't know anything about it, and so and I think now the biggest trend is big players are starting to realize, the distribution partners, that for the longest time they fell into that trap of making a lot of money up front. So I was on the phone with a major airline the other day, and traditionally these products convert 8 to 10%. So even traditionally, 92% of passengers that would go through these websites would think it's a scam or it's not relevant to them. Well, obviously, like you're booking a flight, you're flying to Nairobi, Kenya, and then all of a sudden there's a PDF that's attached, say yes to travel insurance, and you know nothing about it.
Right.
And so I was talking to them, and they said, well, it's actually under 2% now, because what happened in the industry and in COVID-19 exposed that entire landscape to everybody globally, in Europe and in the United States and other parts of the world, where consumers were stuck with policies that did not work for them. And if you Google like major airline, major insurance company, Class A lawsuits, you'll see a bunch of them popping up. And so I think that's a major shift, because now partners are pausing and saying, how can we deliver value to our own customers? And my message to them, don't be fat pigs. don't ask so much up front. Concentrate on the delivering products, the right products to your customers, and concentrate on that 98% of the population and how you can convert them. And that's how you can achieve your financial results. And certainly rewards programs are important, commissions are important, and everything. But it should not come at the expense of, and actually this situation, win for the distribution partner, lose for the insurance company, because there's no way they're making money on it, and it's just being hidden behind the huge company umbrella, because travel insurance at the end of the day is a small sliver of their overall line of business. And then most importantly, customers.
You know, it's interesting that you say that from a business perspective, because, I mean, I'm a lawyer, I'm not a statistician, but as I'm doing the math in my head, if they're only converting, 2%, and the commission is just, say, 60, well, you could cut the commission to 30 if you were able to convert 4% of your customers and come out equal. Yeah. So if you were able to offer better or more relevant products, you could capture some more of that 98% that
for sure, and
that isn't taking it now. That isn't
for sure. And this is where you truly develop a relationship with your customers. You delivering the right products, and there's actually some brands out there like Southwest Airlines that said we are not selling travel insurance because it's just doesn't make any sense. And so you see brands that are coming forward and outright they have that message because they don't agree with this relationship, and companies couldn't find the right products for their customers. But then we don't even entertain those conversations. I remember when we were blowing up in Europe, I got a phone call from a European airline because a lot of customers were complaining about their products that they were selling and saying, how can we sell your products, but I want 65% in commission share? I just said, well, that's what's wrong, obviously, with the industry, so no. And then obviously we didn't work with them. And we can't even afford it, right? Because as a startup, you just can't go into these particular relationships. So we're concentrating on partnerships that share our value, that share delivering the right products to their customers, because we're also doing claims assistance, customer service, everything in-house, because that's another kind of problem in the industry, because insurance companies don't even talk to their own customers, and everything's outsourced between different third parties. So of course they have a lot of parties to feed. And that's how we end up with bad products.
Tell me, how does that, because some of the things you've talked about already, and you've mentioned, and I know that, you and I spoke before you came on the podcast, is, a lot of it to me sounds like dealing with customers' problems. You talked about the example of the husband who was injured in Switzerland. It seems to me like a lot of that would be situations that the insurance company would want to control, and you're saying that some of that, for some of these companies, is outsourced.
100%, yeah.
Yeah. So is Battleface there? I mean, that's all being, like, that type of claims handling process and customer assistance, that's all being handled in-house?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we, of course, as a startup, we are also very realistic. We outsource some of it, but I knew who to outsource it to.
Sure.
Who are the right players and who we can trust. And of course, from licensing perspective as well, for example, here in the United States, you can't process a claim unless you're licensed.
Right.
So we had that all in our roadmap to build this out. But yeah, we're one thing that I wanted to start with at 100% is customer service, handling it ourselves. And then everything else we've outsourced and we've taken it in-house, but that was always in our mission that a customer has to start with us and then end with us, and we have to be responsible for the outcome of the claim and the services and the product and and that's how actually at the end of the day this is where innovation comes from, is I personally believe customers and employees, because then as long as you're in touch with both areas very, very frequently, then the companies will continue to succeed. There are some companies in the US or internationally that still handle everything themselves, and I have 100% respect for them. Big insurance companies, and they don't outsource it. And but yeah, that was a big part of our plan as well.
You've talked about really helping the customers through the processes. Can you give us some examples of your time either at Battleface or maybe when you were working with TravelCard or some of the other carriers, where you've seen the travel insurance kind of kick in and really help the customers?
Oh, well, all the time, because what I do in travel insurance is all help, right? So any kind of any type of incident, like the case I guess the case I told you is they didn't have travel insurance, but most recently, for example, this is actually Battleface's example. We had a couple who was in Argentina, and they had COVID-19, and they missed their obviously they couldn't fly back home. So this is where Battleface just came to glory. We found a hotel that was comfortable with having COVID-19 patients, because it's only selected few that would actually take you with COVID-19. We've delivered meals to them 4 times a day. I'm not sure why it was 4 times and not 3, but that was the.
Is that an extra coverage button?
Maybe that was an extra thing. Maybe it was a snack. Maybe it's an Argentina thing. And then we of course changed all of the flights. We've changed. Of course, we made sure that medical care was available, paid for the diagnostics and medical treatment, prepaid for the expenses, right? And then brought them back home. So this is where travel insurance is really shining and very, very helpful. But then there's also examples when you do book a $20,000 trip to go on a safari trip in 6 months, and you are prepaying all of these expenses. And then the world changes, you get sick, something happens, you cannot travel, and then you get your money back. So that's another good example of where travel insurance is extremely helpful. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I know that one of the things that you talked about, you and I talked about previous to this, I know we talked about the commissions a little bit, and I think one of the other issues that we kind of touched on was transparency in the industry. Mm-hmm. And kind of the struggles and the issues that you see with regards to, the lack of transparency. What is, I guess, Battleface doing to kind of, overcome that and be more transparent?
Different examples again. So, for example, going back to partnerships, like when I get a phone call from a partner and say, I want to earn 70%. I roll out a spreadsheet and I show here's who gets what and how it works, and also put our unit economics there as well, because it has to be a win-win relationship.
Sure.
And then, or I get a phone call from a partner saying that 9 out of 10 claims get denied by insurance company X, and then I'll ask them, well, how much they're paying you? Okay, have you spoken to them? No, we have a broker in between. I'm like, that's an extra 5%. So then I start breaking it down and saying, well, most likely this insurance company doesn't have enough room to actually, to be innovative once it comes to relevant benefits. So that's one aspect of transparency. Another aspect of transparency from customer service perspective, consumers like I said, like I remember John Noel when he started Travel Guard. He wrote the plan, and he worked for a big insurance company, and the big insurance company told him travel insurance will never take off. So then he went off and started doing these kind of the focus group analysis. Every single person said they'll never buy travel insurance, and it's like a movie moment. He's walking away, and then he turns around. He's like, and he told me this story, and he's like, I just wanted to know why. And he turned around and he said why, and people said we don't know anything about it. And so that's how he started Travel Guard, and that's, I think, is very, very true to this date. So when we were going growing really rapidly, I was on the phone every day with customers, talking about travel insurance and what they're looking for. And consumers are essentially often, my mom is, for example, I use my mom all the time. If she buys insurance, she wants to use it. So that concept you have to break out. But we started a conversation. Here's what we don't cover for, and I think that took a lot of our customers by surprise, because we were in the midst of the pandemic. We were very, very specific. Like, here's what we do and here's what we don't do. And for example, over on the European side, our policies don't cover for pre-existing medical conditions, and there's a lot of travelers that care about that, and we would be simply referring them to companies that do provide coverage for pre-existing medical condition, and that level of transparency we won so many customers over. Like you were so upfront with us. This is great, and this is where I would like to see Battleface at. How do we develop the system where we continue to be extremely transparent at what we do, what we cover, what we don't cover for, and then help customers to find the right policy, because Battleface is not for everybody as well, let alone our name, right? It's very unique. And how do we continue to help customers to find the right products?
Now, you mentioned the European market. So you guys are operating in Europe, the United States. Are there other markets you're operating in?
Yeah, we just got our approval in Australia.
Okay. Congratulations.
Yeah, I think that was incredible, because usually to get a license in country takes a while, and I was surprised how fast we got it. It's simply because that we already were operating in the UK. Then Brexit happened, so then of course we had to cross the channel and go to Belgium and set up there, get license, get certified. I remember for the longest time they would not accept my University of Wisconsin MBA program as a valid master's degree, because in Europe, if you want to be licensed and distribute insurance products, you have to have a master's degree as one of the directors. That was one of the weird requirements. And they didn't recognize the University of Wisconsin? So I called the University of Wisconsin, and I was speaking to the department. It was an MBA program. I'm like, here's the deal. They got all offended.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure they did.
So they were writing letters, and eventually it got recognized. But so this is the level of detail that we go through to be properly licensed, properly regulated. And then of course Australia was very similar. They didn't care about my master's degree, but I think we got an approval really, really fast, because we had such significant infrastructure in place in the UK and Europe. Then of course US is a different story. I feel like I have a PhD in insurance. Had to take every possible test that there is, and those are difficult tests.
I've never taken one, so I'll take your word for it.
Really, really difficult. And then Canada. So now we're entering Canada as well. And then, of course, our dream is to be able to build out a global infrastructure where we can offer solutions in countries like Brazil, India, China, other bigger markets. But that probably more of 23, 24.
Now, you talked about kind of the unique name of the company, Battleface. Tell me, is there some significance behind it? How did you guys come up with it?
One of the co-founders as well. He's very creative with names, but essentially I think the idea came from, we were doing a lot of work in emerging markets for AIG actually, managing claims, and we started to see a lot of people traveling in those territories, and they couldn't find travel insurance. And then we were talking to this very famous journalist And she was so passionate, and she said, I keep going to a battlefield and I put my face out there and nobody wants to insure me. So, and that's how we were playing around with names, but we wanted something unique, direct, strong, and we didn't even know that it's going to take off at all, because we were just kind of like playing around with it. We both liked it, and we thought it was awesome. But what's more importantly, we always been kind of shy about it too, because it's either too American or too aggressive or whatever. And he's American, by the way, but it just took off nicely in the European market, and people loved it. People became obsessed with it. And I always say this: if you go into a room, 50% hates it, 50% loves it, but 100% remembers it.
That's what's important, right?
Yeah. And John Noel always told me, name doesn't matter. What matters is the actual product and services that you provide, and then you build your culture. And it's true. It's really is a unique, because I keep thinking that there's all of these names out there, and they're very, very similar to one another. But Battleface kind of carries that strength and that reliability, and us being able to take care of people no matter what the circumstance are. I always get this question asked, like, who is your target customer? And travelers in general, that's who we work with. Whether you are going volunteering on a volunteer mission in Ecuador, or you're crushing coconuts in Bahamas on the beach, those are our customers. Like every type of traveler, every type of experience and circumstance. That's what we're building the company for.
Now, I know when we spoke to kind of before the recording, that one of the things that you had mentioned to me was something I was totally kind of unaware of in the travel insurance marketplace, is the issue of offshoring. Mm-hmm. Could you tell our listeners a little bit about what offshoring is in the terms of travel insurance and kind of why it's an issue?
Or generally, I guess, in insurance as well. I really also, that's another thing that I really didn't know that was the case. It also depends country by country too. So in the United States specifically, I think every state regulators don't like offshore policies, because there is no consumer protection. And offshoring essentially is when companies create a trust or a master policy approach that randomly is written out to some random association, and then all of a sudden you become part of this association, and then you are buying a policy through this method. But then the company doesn't end up paying local taxes, insurance taxes, whatever the jurisdiction you're from, either state or country. And then on top of it, you don't get, and then these products don't get filed. Like here in the United States, all of our products are filed. We go to every state and we file it, and it's a tedious work because we're unbundling, and maybe that's another reason why other insurance companies don't do it, because outside of the comprehensive product, like one size fits all, we've created 43 unique benefits, and we go to each of the states and we say, here's the rate for each one of them. So you can only imagine how tedious that work is. But then we feel that that's the right way of doing business, essentially. And then there you are declaring your rates, you declare the commissions that you plan to pay out, and it's all part of the rate. And then you wait. You wait for different states to approve you. I think we're still waiting on New York and California, the usual suspects.
Yes.
But this is so the offshoring essentially is kind of like takes that process away, and you can essentially bypass that entire process. And some countries are fine with it, but most countries like Canada, Australia, United States, they're not. And then in some cases it makes sense if you are traveling and you're buying travel insurance, but you don't have benefits that are applicable to you in your home country. Then of course I think this is where the element, if you just want medical expenses and you're just covered while you're outside of your home country, maybe this is where kind of the offshore element works. But in general speaking, here in the United States, specific to the United States, a lot of states like Maryland, for example, don't allow it. and New York is another one. So, and regulators, and we as a startup, we just couldn't play that game. So because we needed to come up with a solution that works well for the local market, but there's also, and it's different from surplus lines as well. So
Sure.
offshoring versus surplus lines always gets confused. So
I appreciate that explanation. Kind of wrapping up and kind of in closing, one of the things I always like to ask, especially people who are leading these startups, is kind of an open-ended question. Both is, what do you see kind of some of the biggest opportunities and kind of some of the biggest challenges for Battleface? I know you already talked about you're already eyeing the expansion for 23 and potentially 24. Kind of what other opportunities or challenges? I mean, I know those are two opposite things. Do you see for Battleface kind of moving forward?
opportunities or challenges? Or
Give me either one is fine, or both.
I think, well, building out a global company, it's a lot of fun. Obviously, it's just very, very exciting, and then it becomes more and more interesting because how do you launch a travel insurance company in Brazil, for example? And there's a whole level of different element. It's like it's another dimension that you have to go through. So I think from that perspective, that's both an opportunity and excitement as well, because then us internally, the team at Battleface, we're constantly solving these problems. And but there's also challenges with that. How do you stay focused? How do you stay true to your mission? How do you stay aligned between all of the different jurisdictions and cultures? So yeah, actually today I was just asked this question: what is the biggest challenge? And I think it's just staying kind of like on message, right? Especially with well, actually, with the global company, we're not all in the same location, so we're all in different parts of the world. But kind of COVID-19 helped with the technology as well, right? So now it's a Zoom culture. You can record messages. You can go straight into you can have a town hall meeting. I remember in the old days, at Travel Guard, we would have like a big tent and everyone get together and we talk then. But nowadays, you don't have to do that.
Right.
But certainly, I think building out the culture, I think how do we continue with the same energy? How do we continue to be on track of solving problems? Because even with us, as far how we talk about relevant products, we quickly become irrelevant too. So for example, in the European market, we were at the top for a long time in terms of the products that we're offering. And then we started to see a shift where competition was keeping up with better benefits and more relevant benefits, and you always have to be on top of being true to your customers, and also having, I think in the insurance industry, of course, you also depended a lot on the very traditional insurance companies that we're also challenging, right? So, for example, Lloyd's of London is underwriting our products, or another insurance company, and how do we continue to get that support in the right way? Because it's a different model that we're developing. We're breaking the model apart, and of course, we had a lot of success, and a lot of companies like to work with us, but initially it was extremely challenging. And I think going forward in 23, 24, 25, these regional markets is going to be also another challenge of how do we figure them out, and what actually clicks for a Chinese traveler, for example, versus a Brazilian traveler. That answer I don't have.
Now, I did want to ask, because you just said that you've got kind of a global, I would say, you've got a global company.
Yeah.
You guys are located here in Columbus, Ohio.
Yeah, which is the global headquarters.
Yes.
Who would have known?
How many people do you have a team physically here in Columbus?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How big is that team?
It's roughly about 65.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the rest of your team, because I know I've spoken with some members of your team who are located on the West Coast or in other places.
Yeah.
Are they spread throughout the United States, throughout the world?
Yeah, throughout the world, United States, we love different time zones because, like we don't believe in a single location. And this is the operational mindset from my side. You have to have redundancy everywhere. And we love for example, I'm so excited about Australia is because all of a sudden nobody has to work Sundays, because when it's a Sunday here, it's a Monday there. So, but then We started out by customer service, right? So in customer service, you want to have 24/7 infrastructure, and as a startup, we can't afford to build one single call center. So then we went with the global time zone model, and COVID-19 kind of helped us as well. So all of a sudden, everyone's comfortable working from home, and but then it spilled over to all the other areas of the company, engineering, product, right? So then all of a sudden these areas became 24/7 as well. So and that's the type of company we're building. But then what we really are keen on is understanding these markets, and you have to be physically there. Like we were joking around with our Australia team, because here in the United States we offer coverage for pets, like dogs and cats. Pet travel is a big thing in the United States. Our Australian team were laughing, scratch that, we don't care about pet travel. So, and that's the only way for us to actually get to the market faster, when you have knowledge locally.
You know, it's funny because I don't mean to bring my wife into the podcast again, but that's one of the questions she always asks when we're booking a trip or a vacation is, can we bring our dog?
Yep.
And oftentimes the answer is yes, but every once in a while I'm like, no, we're not flying our dog to, San Diego to see your brother. I mean, he's going to stay at home. But I think that's interesting. You're talking about the knowledge of the local markets being important, because honestly, I never would have thought there would be a difference from a culture standpoint from Australia to the United States as to pet travel. That just wouldn't have occurred to me.
Yeah, I didn't even think of that too, but it's true. It takes them like 24 hours to get somewhere, right? So it's a long trip. So why would you do that? But yeah, it's the same thing in the European market. For example, personal liability benefits are important there, because Europeans travel a lot, and like they go skiing, and then a lot of European ski resorts now require you to have personal liability cover. You're shooping through in the mountain and you hit somebody, and that's important. So here in the United States, that's not as important. So
that's something else that would never even occur to me until you said that. But I saw that there was an issue in the news a couple of weeks ago where there was a skiing accident in Switzerland where a gentleman hit a small child, and I think he was being criminally prosecuted, or at least they were looking into it. And so, again, just not something that would ever even occurred to me.
Yeah, and I think from the partnerships perspective, a lot of brands are building out global companies as well, like Airbnb alone, right? It's a global company. In the traditional world, in the traditional insurance world, I don't know where it started, but somehow these global insurance companies are all segregated. So U.S. doesn't talk to the U.K., Brazil, and it's all ran individually. So you don't have a true global solution, even with big, massive insurance companies. And I never could have understood that when I was at AIG, because I would be calling somebody like, just help me, you're right there in Italy, and it would be completely, it would not work. So we're trying to change that as well, because a lot of fast-growing companies are looking at different markets, and how do you offer a solution to them as well, that they don't have to go to every single different insurance company in every country that they want to enter, and that's what we're here to do, is also build that out for our partners as well. And of course it's also assures that consistency in services as well. So
that's great. Sasha, I really appreciate you taking the time to come in. I really enjoyed our conversation today. It was great to meet you in person. For the first time. I wish you and Battleface all the best luck in the future, and Thanks. We will be looking to see, obviously, because we're here in Columbus too, to hear all about the good news and the expansion that's to come.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, and sorry for rambling for, what is it, like 3
hours?
It seems like.
No, we love, this is the stuff that fascinates us and the reason we do the podcast.
Your listeners are probably like, just shut up.
No. This is a great topic, and we're happy to talk about it. So thanks for coming in.
Well, cool. Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you.